Night descends slowly upon the endless ocean, and in the distance, a faint silver-blue glow still reflects the last breath of the sun that is just sunk below the horizon. No ships sail here, no harbors stand. No sound exists except the quiet sigh of waves brushing against ancient stones buried beneath the water, remnants of something not yet forgotten. Here, in a place unmarked by any map, elders of many nations once whispered about a vanished land. A great continent that once stretched between the eastern and western worlds. They called it by many names, yet one endured through the ages. A name that feels like a prayer, like a memory that refuses to die. Lemuria. This story is not about discovery or proof, nor about maps copied from lost sources. It is an invitation to sit quietly, to listen to echoes that drift from a time when the world was still young, when the seas knew no borders, and when the earth still spoke to the sky without words. There is no need to rush toward answers, for in stories like this, truth is not something to be found, but something to be felt slowly, like the touch of wind or the sudden scent of salt in the air. Imagine a world where the continent still exists, where its mountains rise beneath a soft violet sky, and colossal forests bloom along shores of pale green seas. Giant birds glide above with wings spread wide like sails, and beneath them, rivers shimmer as they wind through valleys wrapped in gentle mist. Here, the first humans may have walked with deliberate calm, not yet knowing war, not yet seeking dominion, learning only to listen to the earth, to read the signs of the heavens, and to wait patiently for the unnamed turning of the seasons. In that long silence, the world seemed to breathe as one, and there were no boundaries between life and time. Lemuria was not a harsh or savage place, but a long dream in which everything grew with quiet awareness. Stone was not merely stone. Water did not simply flow. Air did not merely move. All things remembered. And the people who lived there treated them as old friends who had existed long before their own birth. They did not write history because they saw no need. Their world did not know loss, for nothing was ever taken from them. Now, thousands of years later, only the faintest echo remains, resonating from the dark floor of the sea, among corals and ruins wrapped in white stone. Each time a wave breaks on a lonely shore, or a whirlpool forms without cause, it feels as if the world is trying to remember something almost gone. Perhaps it is coincidence, or perhaps not, for there are moments when the night is too still and the stars hang too near, that one can hear something beneath the waves, something that is not the sea or the creatures within it, but a slow heartbeat, as though the earth itself still carries the pulse of that forgotten continent. So before we go any further, take a slow breath. Let the noise of the modern world drift away. Forget the hum of machines and the glare of artificial light. Imagine an untouched ocean, and beyond its blue haze, a land that sank quietly, without screams, without war, without a single written word. Only a long silence, and the last light fading gently beneath the waves. That is Lemuria, a place where time never ends, it only turns into an echo that never fades. Around 12,000 years before the first human marks were carved into stone, before the pyramids stood, Before names like Sumer or Egypt ever existed in thought, there was a time when the world had a different shape. The oceans were unsettled, the coastlines shifting as if the earth itself were still adjusting its balance. A vast land stretched across the southern hemisphere, reaching from what is now the Indian Ocean toward the Pacific. There lay Lemuria, not in certainty, but in the haze between memory and reality. Modern geologists call it a failed theory. Poets call it humanity's first home. And dreamweavers call it the birthplace of every legend rooted in the sea. No one truly knows, yet echoes of that place appear again and again in stories from every corner of the world, as if the planet itself remembers something hidden beneath the deep. At night, the sky looked different. The stars seemed closer, larger, and perhaps warmer, like lanterns hanging low over a young sky. Volcanoes breathed quiet fire, not in anger, but as a calm exhalation of the living earth. The air smelled of sulfur and salt, and tall trees swayed gently under the pale blue moonlight. Broad rivers flowed peacefully toward seas unbroken by violent currents. Everything felt balanced, as if the world was still in a stage of learning and shaped by ambition, unmeasured by time, unwritten by history. In the heart of that vast land lay great valleys forever, wrapped in mist. It was no ordinary mist, but something older than weather, softer than air. It moved like a living thing, covering mountains and sinking gently onto plains where water met soil. There lived the first Lemurian people, or perhaps beings older than what we now call human. They did not speak loudly, but through quiet gestures and patient gazes. There was no war among them, for there was nothing to take. The world gave them all they needed, and they listened. The animals of that time were larger, yet not fearsome. Birds with wingspans like clouds walked slowly upon the earth. Fish swam through rivers like drifting boats, and massive reptiles basked on rocks without threat or anger. The forests of Lemuria whispered with gentle voices, and pale blue flowers bloomed only at night. Some plants glowed faintly, and the waterfalls shimmered with moonlight until the entire valley looked like a trembling mirror. There were no cities, only small settlements made of stone and soil, built beside the water, facing the place where the first sun rose each day. For them, time did not move as it does now. A day was not measured, but lived. They had no names for years or months, for the seasons came on their own, and they simply followed their rhythm. There was no writing, no numbers, no effort to leave records. For memory was something passed through songs, through stories whispered beneath the stars. When one of them died, they were not buried, but carried to the sea. And the water bore them toward what they called the returning light, a place where all life reunites with the earth. No one knows when it all began or how they came to be. Perhaps Lemuria was not the only ancient land. Perhaps others sank without a trace. Yet whenever divers find statues beneath the waves or stone structures too precise to be natural, the name Lemuria rises again, like a breath drawn from the deep. There is no proof, only intuition that persists, as though the ocean itself guards a secret it refuses to tell. So tonight, imagine that old sky, the nameless sea, and the land reshaping itself beneath the glow of an ancient moon. Imagine a world untouched by history, where the first human sound was not a word, but a breath joining the wind. That is where Lemuria lies, between memory and being, between a world still learning to become itself. On the western edge of Lemuria, where the sea touched the land with the softness of the earth's long breath, life moved to a rhythm barely audible. Morning came slowly, as if the sun hesitated to disturb the world's long sleep. Along the coast lay a stretch of black sand, glittering like wet glass. And upon it crossed footprints, both small and large, some fresh, others half covered by the night wind. Beyond the shore, tall grasses bowed, as if listening to something unseen. And in the distance, silhouettes of towering stones stood like old guardians. There were no carvings, no writings, only the impression that this place had once been understood in a way long forgotten. The people of Lemuria began their days in silence. There were no shouts, no metallic sounds, no tools clanging. They lived in harmony with an environment that seemed to breathe with them. They kindled fire from stone and damp air, not for cooking, but to summon the warmth of light that they believed to be part of the earth's spirit. Around that fire, they sat quietly, facing east, where the sun rose from the ocean, like one awaiting a long-delayed message. Every movement was deliberate and slow, as if time itself paused, unwilling to rush ahead. Lemurian children walked barefoot among the massive roots coiled like sleeping serpents. They played with the clear river water, which reflected faces that looked like shadows of the future. There was no loud laughter, only soft smiles and the sound of ripples touching stones. Among the trees stood low structures made of black stone, built without nails or mortar, yet standing firm for thousands of years. Some had small openings in their roofs through which daylight entered in a straight beam, marking time without clocks. Night in Lemuria was never completely dark. A great moon, closer than the one we know, reflected its light upon the sea like a trembling silver net. Beneath that glow, shadows moved, sometimes human, sometimes something more elusive, as if other forms of life shared the same world. The wind carried the scent of salt and wild flowers, and from afar came a sound resembling a song, but without words, only long tones rising and falling, as if speaking to the stars. They knew no concept of cities or power. Each small group lived in balance, without leaders, without written laws, guided only by inherited customs. When rain came, they did not seek shelter, but stood still, letting the drops touch their skin like blessings beyond explanation. They knew how to read the wind's direction, to sense the weather by the flight of birds, and to tell time from the color of the sky. Within their silence lay wisdom unspoken, and in that stillness, the world seemed perfect. Some modern researchers who discovered strange remains beneath the Indian Ocean often reported massive stone formations resembling remnants of cities. There were corridors leading into spiral-shaped chambers, their walls covered in deep blue marine moss. No one could confirm whether they were man-made, yet their symmetry was too deliberate to be natural. When sonar images revealed precise geometric patterns, many thought it proof that Lemuria had truly existed. Yet, as always, the sea gave no answer, swallowing curiosity in its calm waves. Perhaps what remains of Lemuria is not stone nor structure, but a pattern or rhythm in the ocean floor, in the movement of currents, in the way the wind drifts, or even within ourselves. Perhaps the memory of that drowned world still lives in the modern human longing for something never seen, as though deep in our consciousness we once stood on that same shore, gazing at the same sea, listening to whispers we no longer understand. Night in Lemuria always carried a layer beyond explanation. When the moon reached its highest point, the people gathered upon a flat field of stone whose polished surface reflected the sky like a mirror. There was no grand ceremony, no roaring fire, no loud chants. Only a circle of humans sitting cross-legged, facing the sea, as if conversing with something beyond the waves. At the center of the circle sat a stone bowl filled with seawater, left still until the surface was perfectly calm. It was said that the water could reveal the past if one stared long enough with a quiet mind. None could confirm this, for those who saw rarely spoke of what they had seen. They believed knowledge was not meant to be spoken, but to be carried within, lest it lose its form. When the wind began to shift from the north, they closed their eyes together, not to pray, but to listen. To them, the wind was the language of the earth, and each whisper carried meaning. Sometimes it foretold rain, other times a message from ancestors who sank with the old continent. They believed Lemuria was not merely a land to live upon, but a giant body that breathed. The mountains were its bones, the rivers its blood, and humankind was merely a faint pulse within its vast rhythm. They did not worship nor kneel, they maintained the world's breath in balance. In Lemuria's sky, stars served not only as guides. Elders said each star was an eye of one who had gone before. The brighter its light, the deeper its love for the world left behind. So each night, when the air grew cold and the sea ceased to whisper, Lemurians gazed upward in silence. They did not ask for anything, nor seek reward. They only watched, remembering faces long vanished. Perhaps that was their highest form of worship, silence filled with awareness. Children were taught early never to fear the dark. They were brought to the shoreline on moonless nights, left to listen to the endless rhythm of the waves. Their teachers told them that within darkness there was no enemy, only a space where light hid for a while. They learned that fear was merely a shadow created by an unsettled mind. Thus grew a generation that did not fight, did not conquer, and did not demand. They simply lived, fully aware that life itself was vast enough to be studied for all eternity. Among all Lemurian teachings, one was the most tranquil, yet hardest to grasp. The echo of time. They believed every action, no matter how small, left a sound that never faded. One who planted a flower would hear its echo in another life, while one who shattered a stone without cause would feel a loss without reason in days to come. There was no punishment, only balance, quietly restoring itself. Perhaps that was why there were no courts, no quarrels, for everyone knew the world corrected itself without human interference. When one died in Lemuria, the body was neither buried nor burned. It was laid upon the shore, letting the waves touch the feet until it slowly dissolved into the salt water. There were no laments, no grand rites. People simply stood at a distance, watching the sea embrace what was once its own. They believed the ocean remembered all things, and thus nothing was ever truly lost. Modern divers have occasionally reported finding skeletal remains at great depths, bones unusually flexible and elongated, as if shaped for life between water and air. Perhaps it was optical illusion, or the sea's pressure reshaping them over time. Yet, in the hearts of many who read those reports, a quiet question lingered. Could Lemuria have lived between two realms, a bridge linking sea and sky? On long nights, when the sea stretched like an endless sheet of glass, fishermen of the present still sometimes report hearing faint songs from below. The melody was unrecognizable, just long tones rising and falling with the waves, as if from a time that no longer existed. Perhaps it was only the echo of underwater currents, or perhaps, as dreamers still believe, it was the last breath of Lemuria, not yet extinguished. Morning in Lemuria did not begin with sudden light, but with a slow, nearly imperceptible shift. The sky moved from deep blue to soft gray, then pink. Then a faint orange spilling over the sea-like watercolor that refused to dry. There were no roosters, no bells, only the sound of water moving gently among white stones. Their houses were built from porous stone, taken from shallow seabeds, dried under the sun for months until they hardened like the bones of whales. The walls were never straight, but followed nature's curves, bending like waves, sometimes slanting as if shaped by wind. Between those walls grew silver moss that glowed softly at night, a natural light for those who preferred to live without fire. Lemurian cities knew no straight roads. Every path curved, meandered, sometimes ending in small gardens with circular ponds at the center. The water there was always clear, never drying even as seasons changed, as though a hidden spring flowed beneath the earth. Around each pond stood small faceless statues carved from black stone not found anywhere on the continent. No record tells of its origin, only speculation that it came from unreachable depths of the ocean. The statues were left unnamed, for Lemurians believed naming something was to confine it. At the morning market, there were no shouts, no harsh bargaining. Vendors sat on mats of dried leaves, arranging their goods with calming symmetry. They sold sea salt, shells, fruit from water trees, and small stones, believed to bring good fortune. Transactions happened through gentle gestures, without money, without counting. Everyone brought something, everyone left with something else, and no one felt more or less. Trade was not commerce, but a flow meant to keep the world balanced. Children played by the river that moved slowly toward the sea. They built rings of stones upon the surface, then watched as the current broke them apart. The game was called the game of time, teaching that all things made by hands would one day dissolve and return to water. Their teachers stood far behind, offering no command, only watching. In Lemuria, lessons were not spoken, but shown through silence. Children learned to read the shape of wind, the rhythm of waves, the tones in each drop of rain. Knowledge was not given. It was quietly discovered. At the edge of the city stood a stone tower never completed. It had no peak, and each year people gathered to add one more layer of stone. There was no purpose beyond continuation. They believed the tower was not a monument to be seen, but a reminder that perfection was never to be reached. only pursued. The tower trembled softly in strong winds, producing a hum like the earth's low breathing. On certain nights, that sound reached the sea, causing fishermen to pause and listen, as if to a wordless prayer. Beyond the city stretched white stone plains as far as the eye could see. No tall trees, only shrubs with leaves thin as eggshells. There craftsmen gathered stones for building and carved secret symbols, not letters, but lines and circles representing energy flow. None knew their precise meaning, yet all understood their feeling. A circle meant birth, 2 parallel lines meant balance, 3 dots in a row meant time. These symbols were etched on walls, floors, utensils, and boats. Their world overflowed with meaning that needed no explanation, only presence. In certain areas stood ruins older than the cities themselves. The stones were darker, harder, unmatched to any known technique. Elders said they were remnants of those who came before the sea had a name. There was no fear of the past, nor hunger to master ancient knowledge. They merely kept the ruins clean, brushed away moss, and sometimes placed sea flowers upon them as offerings to time. If one walked along the quiet morning shore, one might find a spiral-shaped stone half buried in sand. Its pattern was not natural, but carved with precision, as if by a hand that knew the earth's rotation. No inscription, no name, only a spiral repeating endlessly, symbolizing a journey without end. Perhaps that was the essence of Lemurian life, to live not seeking an ending, but to move within a circle that forever renews itself. Along the southern coast of Lemuria, the sea was never truly still. Its waves came slowly, breathing at a rhythm older than the world itself. The people believed the sea had its own heartbeat, each current a pulse from a sleeping being beneath the ocean floor. At dawn, before the light fully touched the water, fishermen moved silently toward their boats, built of light wood layered with coral. They carried no nets, only long ropes with strange, half-rounded green stones tied to their ends. Those stones were not for catching fish, but for calling them. When dipped gently into the water, the stones shimmered faintly, and the sea around them trembled as if answering a language known only to marine life. Soon, large fish appeared, circling the boats calmly, offering themselves without fear. There was no blood in Lemurian seas. The fish were not killed, but lulled to sleep using liquid from a purple sea flower found only in certain depths. The fishermen took only a small portion and released the rest so that balance in the ocean was never broken. Whenever someone took more than needed, a storm came not as punishment, but as a correction. The ocean's own voice restoring harmony. It was not fear that guided them, but conversation, a timeless dialogue between human and water. In certain places, elders tended the mere pool. It was no wider than a small field, yet bottomless. Its surface stayed calm, pure, even in rain. At night, it reflected the sky so perfectly that many believed it was not a reflection, but a doorway to another time. Some said if you stared long enough, you would see another city, older, quieter, perhaps the first Lemuria, before it had a name. No one dared dive in, though no law forbade it. People simply waited by the edge, listening to the soft rustle that sounded like whispers from beneath. Every 7 years, when Lemuria's twin moons met at the sky's highest point, the city would extinguish its fires and sit by the shore. They waited for the event known as the Deep Light, soft blue glow rising from the ocean depths, spreading across the waves like a living veil. No one knew its source. Some believed it came from ancient stones that still pulsed with forgotten energy. Others thought it was a message from the drowned ones, a greeting from a time that never truly ended. Children would fall asleep on their mothers' laps as the light danced, while elders stared at the horizon, recognizing something beyond time's reach. In their stone houses, artisans worked in silence. They crafted small objects from transparent crystal found in underwater caves. When sunlight touched the crystal, it emitted soft tones like distant bells. These singing stones were Lemuria's only instruments. Each home had one, each family its own note. When night descended and silence filled the city, those tones resonated across the distance, creating a melody without a composer, a song woven from 1,000 resting hearts. Many crafted objects had no purpose. There were spirals, hollow spheres, thin discs reflecting moonlight tall, made with almost sacred patience. They were called balancing objects. Not for sale, not for use, but to keep the world's rhythm soft. The Lemurians believed every object, no matter how small, carried an echo that could touch water, air, and even thought. They created not for display, but as prayers turned solid. When the night fully arrived and the sea became a black mirror, the weavers stepped outside. They did not weave cloth, but threads of light. Between their fingers stretched fibers from sea plants that appeared only when both moons shone together. Those threads glowed faintly, and with patient weaving formed delicate nets that shimmered like dew. The nets were not meant to catch anything. They were hung between two poles, letting the wind pass through them to create the song of the wind. Thus the days passed in Lemurian, hurried, unambitious, filled with awareness that every being had the same right to live, breathe, and fade. The sea, the stones, the moss, even the sound itself were living things, each completing its own cycle. There was no hierarchy between humans and the world. They lived side by side in quiet harmony, under a sky that seemed forever waiting for something slowly approaching from a distant future. At the heart of Lemuria lay the Aruna Plateau, where the mist never truly left. There stood a vast circle of enormous stones, arranged in near-perfect symmetry, though no trace suggested they were ever moved by human hands. They bore no carvings, no marks of shaping, as if they had risen naturally into place. The stones glowed faintly at sunset, not brightly, but with a soft, pulsing light, like the breathing of a living thing. The elders said this was the Earth's residual echo, energy left from when the world was young and all things spoke in the same frequency. No one knew how the stones lived, yet everyone who approached could feel a vibration in their chest, as though hearing soundless music. Around the circle stood low structures called the Houses of Echo. They had no doors, only narrow slits through which a single person might enter. The walls were made of limestone mixed with sea crystal and thin layers of blue moss. Inside was nothing but a textured floor, warm, even in cold nights. The Lemurians came not to pray, but to listen. They sat for hours, letting the earth's resonance pass through them, reverberating within their chests, quieting their thoughts. There were no rituals, no chants-only silence so dense it seemed to have shape. When they left, they often remained mute for a while, as if their ears were still adjusting to the ordinary world. Nearby lay an oval pool known as the Earth's Eye. Its water came from deep underground and shimmered faintly, as though fragments of light dissolved within it. At night, the surface pulsed slowly, reflecting stars that moved more sluggishly than those in the real sky. The pool's guardians believed that time flowed differently within it. There was an old story of a child who gazed into the Earth's eye and saw his older self gazing back. Whether true or not, anyone who stared too long would feel a gentle hand on their shoulder, followed by a whisper, "Enough." Beyond Aruna's plateau was the Chamber of Deep Light, a subterranean hall accessible only to elders who had witnessed 4 full twin moon cycles. The spiral stairway descended endlessly, and as one went deeper, the air changed, not heavy, not light, simply untouched by time. In the chamber floated a great black crystal sphere, turning slowly in mid-air. It emitted a thin blue haze, penetrating the skin. The elders never touched it. They only sat around it, eyes watering as they watched. They believed the sphere held the earth's first sound, the echo of creation itself. Some said the sphere was not of earth, but a remnant of fallen sky, carrying memory older than the stars. When it vibrated, the floor trembled softly, and the walls shimmered with patterns resembling a map, but not a map of land. The lines curved, connected, and pointed toward something that did not exist on the surface. The elders etched these shapes onto stone tablets, yet each time they tried to copy them, the forms changed, refusing to be remembered by human means. They called it the Deep Trace, a map of realms, reachable only through resonance, not footsteps. Many believed the true technology of Lemuria was not metal or machine, but the art of listening deeply until the echoes of all things became guides. They built homes, ships, and gardens according to the tones the ground returned. If the sound was low, the land was meant for water. If high, it was meant for light. No measurements were used, only the voice of the earth. Lemuria thus grew not as a civilization that conquered nature, but as an echo continuing the melody that began at the dawn of time. Records carved into Aruna stones spoke of the observers. Final attempt before the great event, the rekindling of the Earth's core resonance, meant to heal the cracks forming beneath the sea. They called it the act of calling. For 3 days and nights, Aruna shone without pause. The sky shifted color, seabirds flew low, and the waters trembled, though the air was still. No one knew what happened inside the circle, for on the 4th morning, the light vanished. The observers never emerged. Only the black sphere remained, spinning more slowly, as if weary. Since then, Aruna was left empty, though its stones still stood, still humming whenever the twin moons rose together. Sometimes travelers heard a faint sigh beneath their feet, not frightening, only enough to make one linger, listening, hoping to catch the last words of those who once spoke with the heart of the earth. On the quiet morning after the act of calling, the Aruna Plateau felt utterly changed. The air grew unnaturally still, as if holding its breath too long. The mist that once danced lightly among the stones now hung heavy above the ground, unmoving as though something waited beneath. The soft hum of the earth had vanished. The soil was silent, and in that silence the people sensed something impossible to name as if the world itself were listening back, yet offering no reply. The seas surrounding Lemuria began to lose their clarity, turning into a dark blue that no longer reflected the sky. The fish sank deeper into the abyss, and seabirds vanished, leaving the horizon bare and strangely heavy. In the days that followed, an unrecorded phenomenon began. The stones of Aruna started to pulse in uneven rhythm. One stone would glow faintly, then fade, followed by another across the circle, as if they were trying to speak in a language lost to men. The blue light of the black sphere within the chamber of deep light dimmed, showing faint shadows like visions from a forgotten world. Some remaining watchers believed the sphere was replaying Lemuria's own memory, not forward in time, but backward. They saw a young Earth, unnamed mountains, steaming oceans, and a sky split by two small suns not yet united. Nights grew longer, though the twin moons remained. The waves' voices deepened, as if the sea had begun to speak in a new tongue meant only for stone. Children born after the calling had different eyes, their pupils wide, as if seeing light invisible to others. The elders named them the Keepers of Dusk, the last generation still able to faintly hear the earth's echo. Yet with each new birth, the coastline fractured more. The ground shifted, slow but sure, like the final breath of a world reluctant to end. Then came a sound from beneath the scene, a wave or quake, but a low drone that trembled gently, a note unfinished. Fishermen who dared to sail over the deep claimed they felt it vibrate through their boats, not from wind, but from something vast and slow-moving beneath them. One wrote on dried whaleskin that perhaps the earth was trying to remember itself, that all the echoes once guarded in Aruna were returning inward, merging like a breath drawn before the final silence. The surviving Lemurians left the plateau, descending to the coasts in search of stability. They carried fragments of Aruna's stones, believing each held protective resonance. They lit fires along the beaches, but the flames seldom lasted long, the air too damp and heavy. One night, the sky opened, showing a glow, not from moon or star, but from within the sea itself. Its color could not be named, neither blue nor green only, something that warmed the eyes and chilled the heart. After that night, the sea began to rise, not in waves, but in a slow, steady swelling that never receded. Some said Lemuria was not cursed, but merely returning to sleep. The world had stayed awake too long, and the sound of human voices had disturbed a rhythm older than time. The last watchers of Aruna built a great vessel of stonewood, a material known only to them, and sailed toward the so-called eastern light of place, where mist always glowed, even in darkness. No one knew if they arrived. Only the fossilized shape of their ship remains, reaching toward the horizon like a hand frozen mid-motion. In the heart of Lemuria, where once stood cities of sound and gardens of light, the ground tore open. From the fissure came a glow, same as the black sphere's breath, gentle, wide, and timeless. Those who saw it said all sound ceased. The waves halted mid-crest, the birds hung motionless in air, and even thoughts stilled. In that silence, someone whispered that they heard something, not words, not a song, but a single, long exhale, as if the world itself sighed for the last time. No record exists beyond that day. The stones beneath the sea still emit faint light even now. Divers sometimes report hearing distant echoes below, like whispers in vast underwater chambers. None can tell whether it is merely the sea's resonance or Lemuria itself, still trying to speak from beneath the waves. On certain days, the sea becomes so calm that its surface mirrors the sky perfectly, as if the world above and the one beneath are separated only by a fragile veil. In that stillness, there seems to be a long, ancient breath rising gently from the ocean's floor. The old people in the coastal villages who claim descent from Lemurian sailors believe that when the sea reflects like glass, the spirits of the drowned guardians wander above the surface, watching the remains of the world they once loved. Sometimes, seabirds move strangely, circling in specific spots over the water, as if marking where temples or palaces lie buried far below. There is no sound, only the soft whisper of wind carrying the scent of salt. An old moss, the same scent that once lingered when Lemuria civilization breathed quietly between stone and tide. Some fishermen returning late at night say they have heard faint bells ringing from afar, metallic echoes submerged beneath the waves. They describe the sound not as frightening, but peaceful and nostalgic, as if the ocean were speaking in a language long forgotten by humankind. Each time that sound is heard, the sea glows with a pale green shimmer, as though a great torch burns deep in the abyss. Modern marine scientists call it natural bioluminescence. Yet for those attuned to unseen worlds, it is the lingering pulse of Lemuria's ancient energy, refusing to fade. There exists an old journal written by a Portuguese explorer in the 16th century who claimed to have seen a stone tower beneath the southern seas. He described in detail a symmetrical structure carved with serene faces, expressions so calm they seemed asleep. Scholars later dismissed his notes as mere tricks of light and shadow, yet somehow, in every similar account from different centuries, the same pattern appears, a whisper from the past that refuses to stop repeating itself. If one sits long enough by the shore on a moonless night, eyes closed and breath steady, they say you can feel a subtle vibration in the air. It comes from the direction of the sea, like the heartbeat of a giant still pulsing beneath the waves. Perhaps it is just the rhythm of the currents. Or perhaps the heart of Lemuria still beats slowly, waiting for humankind to become quiet enough to hear it again. No one knows for sure, because every time someone seeks proof, the sea closes itself once more, gently guarding its secret with the patience only time possesses. The night keeps flowing, and among the slow-chasing waves, there is a silence impossible to describe. It feels as if every droplet of water carries memory, carrying a song without lyrics, only a rhythm that brushes against the soul. In that stillness, the world feels impossibly old. and humankind merely a guest upon its surface, trying to understand something far greater than itself. As dawn begins to touch the surface of the sea, the sky shifts from deep blue to violet, then slowly turns to gold. The first light breaking through the mist above the water always feels like a reminder that time still moves, even for places long forgotten. Beneath that untouched depth of darkness, the ruins of Lemuria remain in their eternal slumber. Stone pillars that once held up grand halls are now wrapped in coral and sea anemones, becoming homes for small fish that swim between the cracks of history. No human voice lingers there, only the low hum of the ocean's current breathing, like something timeless. Some deep-sea researchers who lower their cameras report glimpses of symmetrical structures. Yet every time data is recorded, strange interference occurs, as if something below does not wish to be seen or remembered. There's a story often told by veteran divers who have explored the trenches of the Indian Ocean. They say that at a certain depth, the temperature suddenly changes, becoming warmer as though passing through an invisible wall. In that layer of water, their voices echo strangely and vision bends. Some claim to have seen a golden light glowing from cracks in the rocks, like a candle flickering in the dark. But as they approach, the light vanishes, and their equipment ceases to function. The only thing left is an odd feeling of serenity, as if touched by something kind yet impossibly ancient. Local legends on isolated islands speak of silent guardians beings that protect the boundary between the human world and the sunken city. They are said to have no solid form, only faint silhouettes with gentle eyes like moonlight upon water. In some tales, they guide lost fishermen through fog back to safety. Yet others say that anyone who meets their gaze will hear a song from the past, a melody that makes one forget who they are and long only to sink into the depths. There is no proof of such entities, yet the stories existed centuries before diving technology was ever conceived. Some stone inscriptions found along the coast of Madagascar bear strange symbols that match no known language or culture. The carvings depict spirals curling inward, with human figures sinking at the center. Archaeologists debate their meaning. Some interpret them as symbols of spiritual journeys, others as warnings of the catastrophe that drowned Lemuria. Yet beyond academic theory, there is something subtler in the carving as, though the artist tried to convey a message that can only be understood through silence, not words. Amid all theories, myths, and scientific observations, one impression remains impossible to erase. Lemuria, whatever it truly was, feels less like a place from the past and more like an echo that still lives within human consciousness. Every time someone stands by the shore and listens to the waves coming and going, a part of the soul seems to recognize that rhythm is, if it has been heard before, in another life. The sea gives no answers, but it never lies. It only reflects, guards, and conceals in peace. Perhaps that is why so many people feel oddly comforted when they gaze at the horizon. Somewhere there, between sky and water, the lost world still breathes slowly within an endless quiet. The night above the sea always feels older than the night on land. As the stars begin to appear one by one, the surface of the water reflects their light like trembling liquid glass. At a certain point, between waves and wind. There seems to be an unseen layer separating the human world from something deeper, quieter, more ancient. In that stillness, some fishermen sailing alone sometimes hear strange sounds, like songs rising from beneath the water, long and wordless, yet filled with meaning that defies explanation. Those who have heard it say the melody makes the chest feel warm and sad at the same time, as if remembering something they have never lived, but somehow know. Some researchers studying oceanic frequencies have written about low frequencies sounds detected in parts of the Southern Ocean, often called the underwater hum. They assume it comes from tectonic or volcanic activity beneath the sea, yet its vibration pattern is too deliberate, almost melodic. One rare report mentions that this frequency ceases during great storms and resumes when the sea grows calm again, as though it possesses awareness. Those who listened to the recordings in laboratories described it as something alive, like the breathing of a sleeping giant beneath the world. In the imagination of ancient peoples, the ocean was not merely water, but the space between realms, a place where old souls dwell, waiting to be remembered. Among the oral traditions of the Andaman Islands, there is a tale of a waterborne race that existed before humankind learned to ignite fire. They were said to breathe both air and sea, building cities of black stone that gleamed like fish scales and planting light in the ocean floor so their children would not fear the dark. In one version of the tale, they chose to remain beneath the surface when the land dwellers grew too loud and greedy. From that day, the upper and lower worlds parted ways, speaking only through dreams and the songs of the sea. There exists an artifact discovered near Mauritius, a cube-shaped structure with a perfectly smooth surface. Seemingly machine-carved, though buried within geological layers over 12 million years old. No marine organism clings to it, as if the object emits energy that repels life. When lifted to the surface, the ship's metallic components suffered magnetic disruption, and navigational devices spun aimlessly. The artifact now rests within a secured facility, and scientists studying it claim the material is not of Earth ore, at least not of any geological process we know. Those who touched it reported hearing a faint echo within their minds, like the endless rhythm of waves. Beyond scientific reports and oral legends, there remains something softer, something only felt when one stares at the sea too long. It feels like a presence silent and patient, waiting for humankind to remember. Perhaps Lemuria was never truly gone. Perhaps it simply waits among the waves, biding time until the world grows calm enough to hear it again. The sea does not demand, it only keeps. Within each movement of the tide lies a quiet whisper, almost a promise that what has been submerged will someday be found not by sight, but by the slow returning of memory. Among the boundless seas, there are certain points that appear calmer than the waters around them, as if the great currents avoid those places out of quiet reverence. Sailors call them the sleeping pools of the ocean, zones where waves grow weak and the air feels heavier, as though one is peering into something that does not wish to be disturbed. One such place lies between Madagascar and the Cocos Islands, known in ancient maps as Mare Somnus, the Sea of Dreams. Records from a 19th century expedition note that the compass needle turned slowly without direction while passing through the area, and the seabirds that usually followed ships vanished without sound, as if frightened by an unseen presence. In more recent reports, sonar scans revealed faint shapes on the seafloor, resembling the foundations of circular structures, but every attempt to approach caused all electronic systems aboard the vessel to shut down. Lemuria, some say, might never have sunk in the way stories claim. Perhaps it only slipped into a different layer of space, tucked between folds of time, like a book misplaced on the shelf of dimensions. In ancient Indian mythology, there is mention of a land called Kumari Kingdom, lying south of the Tamil mainland, home to the first ancestors who brought knowledge of stars and the reckoning of time. They lived in a world more balanced, where land and sea did not devour each other, and the light of the moon was studied like a science. The tale might be symbolic, or it might be a dim remembrance of something that truly existed, something now kept within the folds of the ocean. In several old manuscripts from Ceylon, it is written that people from the southern lands came to the island carrying luminous stones, objects that could store light for days without flame. These stones were used to illuminate temples at night, and when the sea grew restless, they were said to tremble softly, as if answering a call from afar. None of these artifacts remain, yet the records of the living light appear repeatedly in the writings of many cultures. Fragments of memory scattered among those who once knew the glow from beneath the sea. If Lemuria ever existed, perhaps it was not merely a lost land, but also a civilization that understood the harmony we have since forgotten. They might have known how the Earth's energy flows through stone and water, and how each motion of the stars influences the course of life. In the silence of the ocean, there is the possibility that entire cities still stand below, veiled by coral and time, yet still radiating a faint trace that can only be sensed by a calm heart. Like all great mysteries, Lemuria does not demand belief. It merely waits to be remembered. At a depth of around 4,000 meters, the pressure is so immense that steel bends like warm wax. Yet in a certain region of the eastern Indian Ocean, instruments aboard a Japanese research vessel in 1997 recorded a minor anomaly, a cavity in the seabed that reflected sonar in an unusual way. The echo did not scatter like coral, but resonated rhythmically, as though there were layered chambers beneath the sediment. The official report classified it as a geological phenomenon of unknown origin, buried among thousands of other data entries. But among independent researchers, the place became known by a gentler name: the Silent Valley, because whenever a hydrophone was lowered into the area, the usual noises of the sea vanished. No rumbling of the earth, no current, only a stillness so deep it seemed to embrace. Years later, an unmanned submersible sent to the region captured a massive shadow through its thermal camera. Its shape was irregular, resembling fragments of a wall or pillar swallowed by mud. Yet the way artificial light reflected off its surface suggested it was not natural rock. It was smooth, like something once carved by hand. Nearby, a circular formation nearly 200 meters across appeared, like a vast plaza surrounded by the remnants of shattered stone. The camera recorded only a few seconds before control systems failed. Upon reviewing the footage, there was a fleeting moment when the water seemed to tremble gently, as if something beneath it was breathing. The report was never widely published. In the team's internal notes, a sonar specialist named Takahiro wrote a small annotation. "We all heard something through the headset. It's a very low sound, almost imperceptible, like a plucked tone from somewhere far away. It couldn't be from the ship because all systems were dead." He wrote that after the incident, every crew member shared the same dream for several nights. They dreamed of walking among tall, silent buildings under a sky that glowed without a sun. When they looked up, the light seemed to come from below, not above. Some experts claim it was psychological, a mix of pressure, fatigue, and imagination. But Takahiro's account has since become legend among ocean scientists. They call it the pulse of Lemuria, a term now whispered in deep-sea research circles, not as belief, but as metaphor for something always waiting to be found. If Lemuria truly lies beneath, perhaps it never died at all. Maybe part of its energy still pulses softly, flowing through currents and the memory of the earth. The seawater that passes over its ruins might carry stories, crossing the oceans, and clinging to the waves that eventually reach our shores, bearing a faint scent of a world that once breathed with the stars. Lemuria, in a sense, may still be speaking only in a language we no longer understand. In the years that followed, the mystery slowly became a whisper among oceanic research institutions. In quiet meeting rooms in Tokyo and Reykjavik, scientists spoke in lowered tones, as if afraid the walls might listen. Sonar data from multiple expeditions began to show patterns resembling those found by Takahiro. Echoes emerged from certain depths, like sound waves refusing to die. Some even pulsed in regular intervals, as though something beneath the sea was breathing slowly. No logical explanation could fully account for it. Seismic waves do not behave that way, nor do currents pulse like living things. It was as if something down there was trying to speak, yet in a language not meant for humans. A secret expedition in 2003, partly funded by a European consortium, sent an unmanned submersible to the same coordinates. It was equipped with optical cameras and an experimental underwater LiDAR system. The images transmitted back revealed formations resembling a half-buried city, with streets cut off by mud and volcanic sediment. At its center stood a tiered tower, its top shattered, yet its sides still showed lines too precise for nature. The operator who watched the live feed described a strange sensation as the camera drifted past the structure. The artificial light seemed to turn back on itself, circling the object like mist, unwilling to leave. That recording briefly leaked for a few hours on a private academic network before being erased completely. Yet copies persisted, and from them came the name the City of Sound. The name did not refer to the visuals, but to a deep frequency captured as the camera passed near the main formation. It was not the hum of machinery, nor the scrape of metal. It was more like a long harmonic whisper, almost inaudible, resembling the song of water flowing through a cave. The sound spectrum showed a repeating pattern every 9 minutes. And although acoustic experts tried to label it geological resonance, something about it resisted reason. One researcher, Professor Mira Van Dahl, called it mineral memory. She proposed that the structure might contain remnants of ancient vibrations from when the Earth was still molten and the oceans unformed. According to her, certain materials could record the frequencies of ancient events and release them slowly over time. Yet other marine archaeologists noted that the geometry of the ruins was far too complex for natural formation. There were curves of constant ratio, angles aligned with specific celestial coordinates, and reliefs resembling constellations. That night, in the cold control room above the ocean, one technician recorded something not found in any report. He wrote that as they ended the mission and shut down the systems, the final monitor displayed a small light moving among the ruins. It was not reflection or interference. It drifted slowly, then vanished, leaving behind a faint streak like a comet's tail in dark water. No one dared to speak of it, but everyone knew they had seen something they shouldn't have. The City of Sound became a name whispered softly, like a charm that shouldn't be repeated too often. Scientists who studied the recordings reported sharing the same dreams Takahiro once described years earlier. They saw a silent city under a light coming from the wrong direction, and within it, a long song without lyrics, a melody descending into stillness. The world above may not believe their story, but in the depths, time seems to flow according to different laws. A few years after the discovery, the term the City of Sound began to appear in internal documents of institutions seldom mentioned in public. Archives closed to the public, belonging to a joint oceanographic agency spanning multiple nations, contained reports sealed in red and marked restricted. Within them were records of a series of expeditions never announced, carried out by unmarked research vessels and scientists bound by strict confidentiality contracts. There were no media records, no publications, only coordinates quietly passed from one document to another. The coordinates traced a seafloor path stretching from the western Indian Ocean to the western Pacific. Coast a faint line on the Earth's map, connecting something far greater than a geological anomaly. In a personal note found years after a technician's death, he described how, during research in the area, every electronic device aboard had stopped functioning for exactly 23 minutes. There were no magnetic storms, no solar interference, no physical cause to explain the sudden stillness. Yet during that period, every crew member reported hearing a low murmuring sound, rhythmic and calming, resembling a deep breath filling the space between the Earth's own heartbeats. None of them felt fear-only silence. When the systems resumed, every clock on board was found to be 8 minutes behind the ship's official time. The event became known among researchers as a synchronous drift anomaly, a technical phrase, though its meaning was simpler. Time in that region did not flow like anywhere else. Scientists attempted to map it using three-dimensional sonar systems, revealing a spiral-shaped zone that moved slowly like a vast invisible vortex. Yet the spiral did not pull anything in. It merely turned waves and sound upon themselves, a fragile boundary between two neighboring realities that never truly touched. From this, bolder theories arose. Younger researchers, unwilling to obey institutional caution, proposed that beneath the seafloor might lie not ordinary crust, but remnants of an ancient civilization buried before the oceans were born. They called it the inert Layar zone, where the planet's memory rested in the form of dormant electrical currents and mineral vibrations. To them, the City of Sound was not a dead ruin, but a functioning organ within the Earth itself, primordial lung. Still breathing slowly, exhaling faint echoes of a time that refused to vanish. Satellite oceanography logs later confirmed rhythmic tremors emerging every 19 days. Each occurrence coincided with a subtle rise in surface microwaves, forming small spirals barely visible to the eye, but detectable by radar. These spirals always appeared slightly eastward from their last location, following the path of certain constellations in the night sky. No one could prove a connection between the phenomenon and the City of Sound, yet the repetition became too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Many within the agencies began to suspect an active intelligence beneath the sea. Meanwhile, the public knew nothing. Reports of deep-sea anomalies were dismissed as rumor or myth. Yet among those who had been there was a quiet understanding they had touched something beyond science. Something down there remembered, waited, and perhaps, slowly, called back what was once lost. They knew humanity would eventually return to that depth, not with submarines or cameras, but with an unquenchable curiosity that could not be silenced. In the years that followed, as research continued in the same region, a new pattern emerged, not in the data, but in human behavior. Researchers who spent more than 3 weeks in the area began to show identical symptoms. Waking in the middle of the night with the sense that someone was calling from afar. They could not remember dreams, but described it as a shapeless voice, sometimes like a whisper in water, sometimes like a chant echoing from within their own bones. The team psychologists noted that their brainwave frequencies gradually became synchronized, as if they were beginning to share a collective pattern of awareness. There were no hallucinations, no cognitive decline, only an unnatural peace, as if they were exactly where they were meant to be, despite being adrift in the middle of an ocean with no land in sight. At first, the effect was attributed to pressure, fatigue, or the psychological isolation of the deep sea. Yet when medical data were analyzed, something unusual appeared. The researchers' heart rates dropped by an average of 8%. Their breathing slowed, and stress hormone levels were nearly undetectable. Physiologically, they were in a state close to deep meditation, though they had not been resting. Some even claimed to hear a faint rhythm resembling a song without melody, coming and going like waves. They could not reproduce or describe it, only that it felt as if the earth itself was singing. Some called the phenomenon deep-sea resonance, but among senior researchers, the more favored term was the vibration of memory. They believed the zone they were studying contained not only ancient structures, but also a kind of energy that had once interacted with living consciousness. A small, unpublished theory proposed that the civilization known as Lemuria may have used this resonance principle to store knowledge as sound embedded within matter. Not through writing or symbols, but through sonic imprints. Absorbed into stone like the planet's own memory, waiting to be reawakened by the same vibration. To test this, scientists placed piezoelectric sensors around the spiral anomaly, measuring microvibrations for weeks. When the data were compared to underwater acoustic recordings from the ruins, the same frequency patterns appeared again, this time more orderly-like coded sequences. No one knew how to interpret them, but their structure followed a mathematical rhythm, repeating every 121 seconds. One young scientist quietly remarked that perhaps it was communication, not coincidence. That line was later erased from the official report. From then on, strict time limits were enforced. No researcher was allowed to remain in the zone for more than 20 days. Those who had experienced resonance were required to undergo regular psychological evaluation, though most claimed nothing was wrong. On the contrary, many confessed they longed for the deep calm they had felt there, as if leaving had broken something whole within them. A few quietly resigned and relocated to remote coastlines facing the open ocean, as though hoping to hear that same distant voice again. Those who stayed became increasingly withdrawn, their conversations shifting from data to feelings that defied explanation. In internal notes, a single sentence began to appear in various handwritings. Passed like a whisper from one crew to the next. They never left. They just speak in a way we don't yet understand. No one knew who first wrote it, but after it appeared, the research stopped at the same point, as if even the institutions had realized. They were no longer studying a physical mystery, but staring into an awareness older than humankind itself. After the official research was terminated, the story of the deep-sea resonance did not fade away. Within 2 years, a series of unexplainable disappearances began among former members of the Lemurian research team. They all shared one thing in common: they had once experienced the consciousness synchronization phase within the Lemurian zone. One of them, Dr. Helena Krause, a perfectionist geophysicist known for her skepticism, left a final note in her apartment in Reykjavik. "The frequency hasn't stopped. I just need to find its source again." She was never found, though her small vessel was discovered drifting in the South Atlantic with an intact fuel supply and a disabled navigation system. Similar stories surfaced elsewhere. Dr. Yuuto Nishikawa of Japan, who had once analyzed the underwater wave patterns, was last seen on a beach in Shizuoka, sitting alone with large headphones over his ears. When approached by local authorities, he gazed at the sea and whispered, "They're calling in a rhythm beyond human," before walking straight into the water without looking back. Whether it was deliberate or the result of a trance-like state similar to what he experienced underwater remains unknown. His body was never recovered. Even among those who did not vanish, strange symptoms persisted. One by one, former team members began reporting identical experiences, hearing a faint humming in the silence, especially before falling asleep. Some managed to record it, and the results were consistent. A steady frequency around 7.83 Hz. Scientifically recognized as the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural vibration. Yet there was always an additional undertone, a faint echo concealing a hidden pattern. One recording, when visualized, revealed a triple-layered spiral identical to the structure of the underwater anomaly. These reports briefly drew the attention of the scientific community, but were swiftly silenced by the same institution that had once funded the expedition. The recordings were seized, and all related documents reclassified. Journalists who pursued the story met only silence, no comments, no public archives, no permissions granted. A few independent reporters who refused to back down received anonymous messages bearing the same phrase: "Some knowledge is meant to remain quiet." From then on, the subject of Lemuria drifted from scientific debate into modern mythology, where science and legend collided beneath the waves. Still, one detail remained constant across all accounts. The frequency never truly vanished. Unofficial reports from new research vessels crossing similar coordinates detected electromagnetic pulses, repeating every 121 seconds the same old pattern. As if something in the depths was still trying to speak, waiting for humanity to return with sharper ears. A new generation of young scientists, raised on the legend, began forming independent research groups to continue what their predecessors had abandoned. They called themselves the Echo Project, and their emblem bore a simple phrase: "We listen, because we too are part of the Echo." In the early summer of 2049, the Echo Project finally began the expedition they had spent nearly a decade preparing for. The team consisted of 9 researchers from different disciplines, most of them in their 30s, driven by a balance of scientific curiosity and quiet spirituality. Their vessel, Aletheia, was named after the Greek word for revelation of truth. It was equipped with technology far beyond that of the previous Lemurian expedition's high-resolution acoustic sensors, ultra-deep thermal cameras, quantum sonar, and one experimental device called the neural resonator, capable of translating electromagnetic vibrations into patterns corresponding to human brainwaves. Their goal was simple, yet perilous: to find the true source of the 7.83 Hz frequency that had once driven scientists to madness. The journey began from a small harbor in Cape Town, as the ship crossed the 37th southern parallel. The sea began to shift in color from deep blue to silver blue, shimmering with an undercurrent of light. At first, they thought it was an optical illusion caused by bioluminescent plankton. But the further they sailed, the more the lights began forming concentric circles around the vessel, like an eye slowly opening. Nobody spoke. They only stood on deck, letting the hum of the engines merge with the water, until Captain Lucas Meyer quietly said, "It feels like we've been invited in," upon reaching the coordinates believed to mark Lemuria's center. The sea became almost unnaturally calm. The surface reflected the sky like an endless blue mirror. They deployed the first probe, and within seconds, the monitors displayed a scene that left everyone silent. At a depth of 4,000 meters lay a circular structure roughly 3 kilometers wide. It was too symmetrical to be natural. Its walls were made up of repeating triangular patterns, with a central spiral that slowly rotated as though still alive. When the neural resonator was activated for the first time, the captured signal wasn't merely acoustic vibration. It carried a pattern resembling biological electrical activity, rising and falling like the brain waves of a person in REM sleep. Dr. Clara Rinaldi, the team's neuroacoustics expert, recalibrated the synchronization frequency and decided to listen to the converted output. Inside the silent cabin, the team heard something no machine could have produced a faint. Wordless choir, layered and resonant, as if thousands of human voices were weaving a single ancient harmony. No one spoke. None could tell whether it was a message or simply a coincidence of natural resonance. Dr. Rinaldi noted that the rhythm followed a precise T121-second cycle the same interval reported by the earlier expedition. She ordered the transmission to be recorded, but before the system could complete the process, the ship's power fluctuated. Lights dimmed, monitors flickered, and the speakers emitted a low hum that grew into a heavy vibration. The Alethea shook for almost 30 seconds before everything went still again. When they rebooted the systems, they discovered that all audio data from the previous 3 minutes had vanished, as if it had never existed. The crew grew uneasy. Captain Meyer called for a temporary halt to experiments, but Dr. Rinaldi insisted they were close to something profound. She argued that the signal wasn't an anomaly, but a structured form of communication. Built from neuroresonant patterns, some kind of subconscious language that could only be perceived by the human brain in a specific state. Her claim divided the team. Some believed it to be a dangerous electromagnetic phenomenon, while others felt they had touched something older than humanity itself. That night, as Alethea drifted over the silent ocean, the sky turned a deep violet. There were no stars, only faint pulsating light on the horizon. In her electronic journal, Dr. Rinaldi typed one final line before the ship's signal disappeared from satellite tracking for 12 hours. The frequency is listening back. The 12 missing hours from satellite records would remain an unsolved mystery. When Alethea's signal reappeared, the vessel was still in the exact same coordinates, not a meter adrift, yet something had changed within every person aboard. The sensor logs showed no mechanical failures, no storms, no electromagnetic surges. Yet all the clocks displayed different times, some delayed by an hour, others ahead by 3, a few frozen precisely at 2:11 a.m. It was as if time itself had fractured into several paths and never found its way back. The team's physician, Dr. Elena Kovac, reported that every crew member exhibited symptoms similar to extremely deep REM sleep, though they all swore they had never fallen asleep. Some recalled identical dreams, a scientifically impossible occurrence. They described the same place, a vast plain with a blue horizon and, at its center, a crystal tower pulsing like a giant heart. There was no sound, only a soft vibration in the air, like music without notes. Dr. Rinaldi concluded that whatever they had experienced wasn't a hallucination, but a form of communication through synchronized brainwave patterns aligned by the 7.83 Hz frequency. When they regained consciousness, technician Ayaka Mori discovered that the neural resonator was still active, though the power system had supposedly been off during the blackout. Even more startling, it was now recording waves that formed precise, repeating structures too orderly to be random. She displayed the data on the main screen, and from a distance, the waveform resembled a faint imagimap, not of the modern Earth, for the continents were shaped differently. Yet something recognizable emerged, a massive curvature in the Indian Ocean, exactly where Lemuria's ruins were thought to lie. Captain Meyer ordered a rapid analysis. Using the 3D visualization system, they projected the pattern into the air, and the sight left the room in stunned silence. At the map center was a spiral symbol identical to the underwater structure seen on sonar. From that spiral, thin lines extended outward, linking multiple regions across the planet. One line pointed west toward the coast of Madagascar, Another led north to the Red Sea. Others spiraled eastward into the Pacific. Dr. Rinaldi analyzed further and found that the waveform wasn't just a map, but also a sequence of tones that, when translated into sound, formed a harmonic pattern of mathematical perfection. She called it the map song. When they played it, the room gently vibrated, and the screen shimmered with color like a small aurora dancing in midair. No one spoke until Alina whispered, "This isn't a message. It's an invitation." An invitation to what? No one could tell. At dawn, as they attempted to transmit the data to their research base on land, every signal failed. The radio hissed with interference, and within the static came a faint echo, the same singing from the night before. This time it was closer, deeper, as though whispering directly behind their ears. Some of the team instinctively closed their eyes and began humming the same frequency, their bodies unconsciously resonating with the tone. The final log entry before transmission ceased read simply, "The source of communication does not come from below the sea, but from within the collective field of consciousness." After that line, the recording system went dark for 2 minutes. When it came back online, everyone stared at each other in a long, wordless silence until Dr. Rinaldi finally murmured, "They remember us, as the days passed aboard Alethea." Subtle changes began to surface not in the machinery or instruments, but in how the crew perceived the world around them. No one spoke loudly anymore. Laughter ceased. The ship's recreation room fell silent. Everyone moved as if following an unseen rhythm, their footsteps unconsciously synchronized. They ate in silence, often without realizing their spoons had never reached the food. Their eyes were not empty, but fixed, as though listening to something beyond ordinary hearing. Alina was the first to record this, noting in her medical log that the crew's brain activity has synchronized in the right temporal and parietal regions, as if receiving an external signal without conscious awareness. On the third night after the incident, Alethea drifted over a sea, so still it mirrored the sky like black glass. There were no stars, only a thin mist and a moon larger than it should have been. Amid that stillness, a technician named Hassan stood at the aft deck, staring into the ocean. He whispered softly in a language no one recognized. Surveillance microphones caught the sound and transmitted it to the control room. The pattern repeated with rhythmic precision, matching the waveform once recorded by the neural resonator. When he stopped, thermal sensors registered a temperature drop of 7 degrees around his body. When approached, he smiled faintly and said, "They are here." Dr. Rinaldi led him gently to the medical bay. But as soon as the door closed, the entire ship's lighting dimmed for 5 seconds. When it returned, the observation window was covered in a thin crust of salt, forming a perfect spiral pattern. No one understood how it appeared so quickly, especially from within a sealed room. Attempts to wipe it away only caused new spirals to form elsewhere, like condensation spelling a language of its own. Over the next few hours, every electronic system aboard began to display similar disturbances. Screens flickered, showing vague outlines of faces with elongated eyes and pale greenish skin. Some crew dismissed it as sonar interference, but Alina knew better. She began hearing a voice not in words, but in pulses of emotion and imagery. She saw a vast underwater city of stone towers and bridges made of light. Tall beings moved slowly through it, carrying small, glowing orbs in their hands as if tending to memories that still burned. The next morning, Hassan was gone. Security footage showed him walking to the outer deck at 3:14 a.m. He stopped at the railing and simply vanished. There was no splash, no struggle, no wave. Just absence. Moments later, sonar detected an unknown echo beneath the ship, large, circular, moving upward as if following a current from below, not the sea itself. Rinaldi stared at the monitor, pale. She whispered, "This isn't the sea. It's a breathing heart." Captain Meyer ordered the engines to power up, but the ship refused to move. The turbines roared, yet the velocity remained zero. The surrounding water vibrated softly, and on sonar, the spiral shape expanded, resembling the petals of a colossal flower. At its center, a faint golden light began to rise toward the surface. Alina clutched her chest, feeling a soft pressure in her heart, and murmured, "They're trying to speak again." Within minutes, everyone felt it a gentle push inside their chests, not pain, but the sensation of remembering something long forgotten. The echo grew stronger, and tears welled in every eye for no discernible reason. Then the voice returned, not through air, but within their minds, tender and sorrowful. The words were untranslatable, yet their meaning was unmistakable. "We did not drown. We are waiting." On the fourth night, the sky transformed into an unrecognizable canvas. The mist that usually hovered over the sea now rose higher, spinning slowly like a fine spiral in the air. From the upper deck of Alethea, the crew witnessed something no one had ever seen before. In the middle of the dark sea, a faint circle of light appeared, growing wider and wider until it surrounded nearly the entire ship. Its color was neither white nor blue, but a gentle mix of faded gold and silvery green, pulsing softly like the breath of a sleeping creature. No wave came from its center. It was as if the ocean itself had ceased to breathe. Elena stood beside Dr. Rinaldi, her eyes unblinking. "This isn't marine phosphor," she whispered. "It's intentional patterning." She pointed to the outer ring, where tiny rays formed geometric shapes resembling a map or perhaps a diagram that defied translation. Captain Meyer ordered all surveillance systems active, yet the cameras couldn't capture the true colors. The monitors showed only plain white light, devoid of texture, as though the instruments were blind to the frequency being emitted. The air around the ship changed. Wasn't cold or hot, but heavy, like the still air inside an ancient stone chamber. The ship's engines stopped at powered down, but silenced. Despite the total failure of electronics, the emergency lights never went out. A faint golden glow rose from the sea's surface, seeping into the ship's steel hull like veins of living light. Alina placed her hand on the wall and felt a delicate vibration under her fingertips. It wasn't electrical. It felt like a heartbeat. Moments later, something formed beneath the water, a mesh of light made of thousands of fine lines. At first, it appeared as a vast flat circle, but soon it lifted, shaping itself into a transparent dome around the ship. The lattice shimmered softly, each thread radiating a tone of its own. There was no audible sound, yet everyone aboard could feel the melody within their minds, resonating through the chest, calm yet meaningful. Rinaldi, hands trembling, flipped through an old notebook describing the ancient theory of the Lemurian lattice and energy web said to connect early humans with the sea beings that vanished long ago. "They don't speak in words," she murmured. "They speak through resonance and form." Alina watched the golden ripples dance upon the water, sensing that every motion carried a message older than language itself. The light grew brighter. Inside the dome appeared faint outlines of a city made of dust and glow. Towering spires rose from the seabed, surrounded by glittering corridors. Tall figures moved slowly among the ruins, each holding a sphere of light exactly as Alina had seen in her earlier vision. Each of their steps released ripples that reached upward, touching the hearts of those aboard. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. Not human, but not alien either. 'Twas a whisper built from water and breath. Images filled their minds. A vast island sinking slowly into the sea. People standing calmly on its shore, gazing at the sky without fear. They did not flee. They sang a long, rising tone that seemed to open a gate between worlds. The message was not warning, but remembrance. A call to recall what had been lost, to acknowledge something that still waited beneath the folds of time. When the dome began to fade, the sea turned black once more. Yet traces of the glow clung to the hull, forming spirals identical to those seen earlier in the observation room. The ocean's temperature rose slightly, and deep sea fish surfaced, circling Aletheia in perfect formation. The crew did not panic. They only stood still, understanding that whatever had come that night was not a threat, but a quiet invitation from an age that wished to be remembered. The next morning, the air around Aletheia felt different. There was no wind, no wave only, an ocean still as ancient glass reflecting a greenish sky. In the distance, the horizon wavered, trembling slightly as though the sea itself were holding its breath. The crew soon realized the ship's clocks were no longer synchronized. The digital clocks in the navigation room showed a different time from the mechanical watches on their wrists, and the compass needle turned slowly, directionless. Captain Meyer attempted to contact the research station on land, but only a raspy echo came through the radio frequency. It wasn't static, it sounded like a recording, an echo replayed from a time long forgotten. Rinaldi approached the communication panel and manually adjusted the frequency. The sound became clearer, transforming into a sequence of low tones in steady rhythm. Lena closed her eyes, listening not with her ears, but with her chest. She felt as though she had heard that rhythm before in a dream, or perhaps in the sea's whisper days earlier. When Rinaldi lowered the volume, a faint word emerged from the static. It repeated 3 times, slow and even, like a chant fractured by time. No one aboard recognized the language, yet all understood its meaning. You called to return. While they tried to interpret the message, the sonar screen began displaying strange shapes beneath the ship. The usual contours of the ocean floor shifted into repeating circular patterns, like hidden architecture buried under sand and pressure. No valid depth data appeared. the numbers fluctuated wildly, as if the sonar were no longer measuring distance, but time. On the screen, long shadows appeared, towers or pillars rising upright from the seabed. Alina requested permission to lower the underwater camera, and the captain silently nodded. The cable descended slowly through the greenish water. At 100 meters, the monitor revealed something that left everyone speechless. A vast stone structure, half buried in sand, stood at the bottom. Its surface bore circular carvings resembling a sun, with radiating lines. Yet at the center was not a human figure, but a swirling shape like a whirlpool. Rinaldi took notes rapidly and muttered with trembling voice, "This isn't natural. It's constructed." Deeper down, the camera captured a long wall that seemed collapsed, ruins stretching beyond sight. There was an open passage, like a cave mouth waiting, yet inside was total darkness. From within that darkness came a gentle glow, not a reflection from the lights, but a self-contained pulse, slow and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Alina stared at the screen in silence. The light had the same hue as the energy dome from the night before. Slowly, it rose upward through the water, touching the ship's hull with the same pulse as the radio waves. The two phenomena mirrored each other, as if connected across time itself. Then, the communication system came alive again. From the speaker, a faint voice, this time not mere tones, but fragmented sentences. ... The water remembers. A long pause, then, not gone, only beneath. Rinaldi looked at Alina. No translation was needed. The meaning was clear. The water remembers, and what was lost had never truly vanished. The voice repeated a few more times before fading into a hum that left their chests heavy, but strangely warm, as if haunted by nostalgia for something they'd never lived, yet deeply recognized. That night, as everyone rested on deck, the sea still shimmered faintly from below. The fish circled the ship in precise, almost choreographed patterns. Captain Meyer stood on the bridge, watching the stillness. "It feels like we're not exploring the ocean," he said softly, "but it's memory." Rinaldi nodded. She knew, since the first light appeared, that they were no longer observers. They had become part of something far older, a living consciousness, lingering beneath the surface of a world long drowned. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the underwater camera was lowered once again to the same location. The sea remained calm, as if reluctant to wake something sleeping beneath its surface. The soft hum of the winch echoed as the cable descended, meter by meter, until the monitor once again revealed the seabed. Yet something had changed. The sand that had partially covered the wall before was now swept clean, as if an unseen current had passed through. The carvings on the stones appeared clearer. The lines were not random. They formed geometric precision, too deliberate for coincidence. Rinaldi zoomed in, and they all saw what looked like rows of symbols, a kind of writing lost to history. None of them could read it, but Alina whispered, "Maybe it's not meant to be read. Maybe it's meant to be remembered." Captain Meyer stood silently behind the monitor, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp. As the camera shifted to the right, something flickered at the edge of the frame. For an instant, it looked like a shadow moving among the ruins. Rinaldi replayed the footage, slowing it down. The shadow appeared again, this time clearer. It resembled a human figure upright, but moving slowly, fluidly, as if walking through water heavier than water itself. There was no visible face, only a silhouette reflecting the faint light around the ruins. "Is that ... a reflection?" Alina whispered. No one answered. The camera descended deeper, passing drifting layers of sand. The deeper it went, the more structures emerged. Pillars, some still standing, others fallen and wrapped in sea moss. Between them ran a long stone road, sloping downward into a valley surrounded by cliffs. From above, it resembled an ancient city's main avenue. The camera panned toward its end, revealing a curved gate guarded by two statues. They were massive ebon, distorted by the water, and each held something in its hand. Not a weapon, but a glowing sphere radiating from within. Rinaldi adjusted the contrast to see more clearly, but every time the light from those spheres met the camera's beam, interference distorted the feed. Horizontal lines tore across the image, and a faint hum filled the speakers. Beneath the static, another sound emerged, a human-like drone in low harmony. It wasn't coming from the surface. It came from below, from the very depth where the camera hung. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the pattern of the sound. It was the same melody from the radio the day before, only deeper, older, and unbearably sad. Then the screen froze. Behind the stone gate, amidst the fallen pillars, more shadows appeared. They didn't move like fish or any sea creature. They walked slowly, in repeating paths, as if performing a ritual older than memory. Captain Meyer took control and zoomed in. As the camera approached, one of the shadows stopped and turned directly toward it. There was no face, only darkness shaped like a human, yet something within it was alive. The screen trembled, then went black. The ship fell silent. For several minutes, no one spoke. The recording system showed a sudden power drop, as though something beneath had drained the ship's energy. Alina stared at the blank screen, not afraid, but sorrowful, like someone who had just recognized a truth she wished she hadn't. "They never left," she said softly. "They're still there. They're still walking." Rinaldi rebooted the system, and the image gradually returned. Now there was only sand and stone. No shadows, no light, just the mute weight of the sea. Yet at the far edge of the frame, one final image flickered before vanishing. A great carving depicting two human-like figures holding glowing spheres. Above, a spiral symbol identical to the one found on the old map. Whether coincidence or message, no one could tell. That night, the deck was dimly lit by swinging lamps that moved gently with the waves. Alina sat in a metal chair near the railing, gazing at the black sea under a moonless sky. In her hand was a small recorder looping the sound from the depths. She listened in silence, eyes closed. The sound was more than a low hum. After hours of listening, she began to sense something within its frequency, a pattern, repeating, almost like breathing, with steady intervals, as if something below was exhaling slowly. She measured the rhythm and found it matched the human brain's delta waves during deep sleep. Her pulse quickened, though her face remained calm. In her notebook she wrote, "If the ocean dreams, Perhaps this is how it speaks. Rinaldi approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He sat beside her quietly for a while. The wind brushed their faces with salt and metal. "I can't stop thinking about that shadow," he finally said. Alina opened her eyes. "Maybe it wasn't a shadow," she replied flatly. "Maybe a memory. Like an echo replayed by time." Rinaldi stared at the black water. "Then they're not ghosts, just unfinished memories." Alina smiled faintly. Maybe those memories are looking for someone to listen. In the control room, Captain Meyer and 2 technicians were analyzing the underwater sound. The frequencies showed a dual pattern, one audible to humans, the other below the threshold of hearing. When both were played together, strange interference formed on the screen. The oscillating waves created a spiral shape identical to the symbol carved on the submerged stones. One technician tried to magnify the data, but the monitor flashed an error, then filled with rows of numbers and symbols no one recognized. Captain Meyer stared silently, then switched off the display. "Save everything. Don't analyze it yet," he said quietly. By 2 a.m., the sea had gone still as glass. No wind, no hum of engines. The sky was clear, but the stars seemed displaced, as if subtly rearranged. Alina returned to her cabin and noted that the deep sound now resonated with her heartbeat, her body syncing with it like an involuntary rhythm. Each time she closed her eyes, spirals spun behind her eyelids, sometimes faces, sometimes a trembling city under green light. She woke several times, feeling as though she had spoken with someone, but could not remember who. Near dawn, the sea began to hum again, this time without any instruments. The wind carried the sound across the surface, soft, but strong enough to make the ship's metal rail vibrate faintly. Everyone still awake felt it, a subtle trembling in the chest, like a note too low to hear, but too real to ignore. Captain Meyer stepped outside, staring at the black sea that refused to reflect the stars. He stood a long time, then murmured, "Maybe the sea remembers us too." Alina heard him. And for the first time, she understood that their mission might not be about archaeology or lost civilizations. It was a dialogue between humans and something far older than words, older than time, older than life itself. She wrote one final line before closing her notebook. "If Lemuria still breathes below, then we are only echoes inside its dream." Then she watched the sea until her eyes grew heavy, and the sound slowly dissolved back into the vast, eternal silence. As dawn approached, a thin mist descended from the north, slowly veiling the once clear sea. The first light of the sun failed to pierce it, casting only a faint golden hue across the damp air. Alina stood on the upper deck, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness, gazing toward a horizon that seemed erased. She hadn't slept since the night before, her mind still filled with the sound from the deep. As she stared at the water, she began to notice something strange. Through the fog, the sea seemed to glow faintly, not from the reflection of sunlight, but from within itself. The glow was greenish, pulsing gently in rhythm with the sound signal they had recorded the previous night. Looking closer, she realized the light was forming faint patterns like letters, though not from any language she knew. It was as if the ocean was writing something with ink made of light. Rinaldi appeared, visibly alarmed. He had already called for Captain Meyer, who now stood behind them with binoculars in hand. The captain remained silent, staring at the water that looked like a living canvas. Each shimmer on the surface rearranged into spirals and circles, sometimes meeting, sometimes fading messages that appeared and disappeared before they could be understood. Alina tried taking a photo, but the camera captured nothing but fog. She tried recording a video, and again the same result. Only calm water, no glow. Yet they all saw it clearly, as though the phenomenon existed only for the eyes, not for machines. In the control room, a technician shouted for the captain. On the radar screen, a massive anomaly had appeared about 2 kilometers below the ship, moving slowly, as if something vast was awakening from a long sleep. Electromagnetic readings spiked sharply, but no external signal or global system registered the disturbance. It was as if the ship had slipped outside the map of the world. Alina looked down at the dark water and felt a strange pull within her chest, as though something was calling her not through sound, but through sensation. Closing her eyes, she heard faint impressions in her mind, not words, but vibrations and rhythm. Captain Meyer ordered everyone to step back from the railing, but no one moved. All eyes were fixed on the living sea. The light beneath them brightened, forming a perfect circle around the ship. A low hum spread through the air, similar to the frequency from the night before, but deeper, resonating in their bones. Alina knelt and placed her palm on the deck, feeling the vibration rising from below. She realized the sea was not angry. It was speaking. The captain tried to start the engines, but they failed to respond. The lights in the control room flickered, dimmed, then returned with a different hue, softer, almost organic. As confusion spread, the sky began to throb faintly, the clouds above pulsing in time with the rhythm below. On the horizon, the mist split open, revealing something glimmering, a crystalline tower rising from the deep. There was no splash, no roar, only the quiet motion of something breathing out from beneath the earth. The structure was translucent, immense, and perfectly still, as if not a solid object, but a projection, a memory of something that once was. Alina watched in silence, knowing that this was no illusion. They were witnessing the sea's recollection, the final echo of a forgotten continent trying to reveal itself once more before sinking into eternal quiet. The Tower of Light stood tall in the glowing circle of the sea, silent and unwavering like a needle of time piercing through the mist. Gradually, its color shifted from gentle green to pale blue, then to silver, finally shimmering with the opalescent sheen of a pearl. There were no crashing waves, only a soft vibration in the air, as if the whole atmosphere was breathing with it. Alina stood where she was, transfixed by the sight that defied all explanation. She could not tell if what she saw was real, or if it was an illusion born from exhaustion and the strange stillness of time upon the ocean. Yet something deep inside her knew the tower was not mere light. It was a window into a buried age. Sounds began to rise from the structure, faint at first, then clearer. They were not mechanical, not the song of whales or the movement of tides, but something closer to a hymn. Long, low tones layered together, as though sung by 1,000 unseen voices united in one harmony. There were no words, no language, yet within the waves of sound lingered emotion, sorrow, longing, reverence without an audience. Alina closed her eyes and listened in silence, feeling the resonance travel from her hair down to her heart. The melody seemed to come from beneath the sea, passing through water, through time, and through herself. Rinaldi watched the sonar monitor, its display now filled with strange, repeating patterns. The underwater signals were no longer random. They followed a structured rhythm, almost like a form of language. He converted the frequencies into a visual graph, and what appeared astonished him. The pattern resembled spirals, identical to ancient carvings found on stones scattered across islands of the Indian Ocean, symbols once said to represent Lemuria, the lost continent swallowed by the sea. Captain Meyer stood in silence, the reflection of the blue light shimmering in his eyes, as though he too was under its spell. Gradually, the song grew more structured. Each vibration formed ripples on the ocean's surface, interlocking into a luminous mosaic. Alina noticed that the ripples did not fade, but instead transformed into symbols moving like living things. She sensed that the sea was telling a story of a time when the world was young, when vast lands stretched beneath violet skies, when colossal beings walked among towering trees and humankind had not yet learned the meaning of a name. The song brought faint images into her mind. She saw an underwater city, other crystal towers, larger ones, streets paved with black stone gleaming like wet glass. There were statues with calm faces, some toppled and covered with coral, others still standing, looking upward as if awaiting something that would never come. In her vision, the place was alive not in form, but an echo, in memory preserved within the sea. The tower that had risen might only be a doorway, open for a moment, revealing that the ocean never truly forgets what it has claimed. A soft wind swept through, carrying the scent of salt and metal. From the east, seabirds flew low, though none approached. It was as if they too knew that what was unfolding did not belong to the ordinary world. Alina opened her eyes to find the water around the ship changing color. Its surface no longer just glotted, shimmered like liquid glass. Looking down, she saw the shadow of a vast city beneath them. Streets crossing like veins, lights moving slowly like ancient torches guiding the way into the depths. When the song reached its peak, something within the sea shifted. The surface no longer shimmered, began to rotate slowly, like the turning of time itself. At the center, the tower of light stretched upward, splitting into several translucent layers, spinning in opposite directions. From each layer radiated beams that seemed to point their gaze toward a single point beneath the ship. Rinaldi swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he gripped the sonar controls. The depth, it's dropping on its own, he whispered, disbelief clouding his voice. The screen displayed impossible numbers. The seabed below them was descending, as if the ocean floor itself was opening. Alina clutched the iron railing on the deck, feeling the air around her grow warm, as though they were no longer adrift in the cold open sea. The tower's glow reflected across her face, giving her skin a faint shimmer like stardust. She could hear her heartbeat blending with the rhythm of the ocean's song, her body syncing with its pulse, something within her knew that the call was not a threat. It was strange, part fear, part hope, part yearning for something she could not name. Captain Meyer tried to issue the command to reverse engines, but the ship was unresponsive. Every system engine, rudder, even emergency power seemed to breathe in sync with the tower's rhythm. "It's as if the ship itself is breathing with it," he muttered, barely loud enough to be heard. His eyes remained fixed on the sea, reflecting both wonder and surrender. From beneath the hull, enormous bubbles began to rise, breaking the surface with a soft murmur. Each bubble carried reflections of faces, structures, or perhaps memories trapped within the water. Alina watched one closely, and within its surface, she saw herself dressed in garments of an ancient style, standing upon a tall building identical to the tower before her. The sight startled her, yet she felt no fear. Instead, her heart pulsed with the quiet recognition of something long lost within her own being. "It's calling us," Alina whispered. Her voice was soft, but both Rinaldi and Meyer heard her clearly. No one replied. They all knew there was no turning back. The tower had not merely risen from the Sit, was opening a passage between worlds. Waves of light spread outward, brushing against the ship's hull like a hand beckoning them closer. A low rumble echoed, not from a storm, but from the depths themselves, resonating in harmony with the structure. Then, suddenly, the ship began to descend, not sinking, but gliding downward without propulsion. There was no sense of falling, only the smooth drift through a sea of condensed light. The water around them became a silver dimension with no clear direction neither above nor below. Alina looked out through the bridge window, and for a brief, impossible moment, she saw a sky beneath the sea. There were clouds, muted sunlight, and the faint outline of land like the reflection of another world. She understood then that they had crossed the boundary. The world above was now only a shadow, and they stood at the threshold of something far older than history itself. As the ship passed through the final layer of light, the sea around them transformed into something beyond human comprehension. There was no more water, no pressure, no waves. They drifted through a space made of soft mist, where every glowing particle moved slowly, as if dancing to an inaudible rhythm. In the distance, the shadow of a city emerged, vast, silent, standing at the ocean's floor like a palace from a dream. Towering pillars shimmered faintly, and among the still intact ruins lay streets leading toward a central core surrounded by golden light. There was no sign of life, yet the entire place felt alive, breathing slowly in sync with their arrival. Alina stood motionless at the window, her eyes wide, her voice caught in her throat. She could not tell whether what she saw was the past or an illusion. Yet everything before her was so real she could almost feel the warmth of the light flowing from the stone walls. At the heart of the city was a great dome structure, half submerged but still gleaming softly from within. Its form was alien, unlike anything built by hands known to history. The walls seemed made of both stone and metal, carved with patterns resembling ocean waves frozen in time. Captain Meyer gazed in silence. The hardness in his eyes softened. His face lost the rigid tension he always carried. "So this is Lemuria," he whispered, his voice nearly gone. None of them responded. Each was lost in their own awe and confusion. They knew they were witnessing something impossible, something never meant to be rediscovered. Rinaldi glanced at the sonar screen, but it showed only a blur of unrecognizable signals. "No logical reading," he muttered. "Even our ship isn't registering." Then he looked outside and, for an instant, saw figures moving among the buildings. Soft silhouettes shaped like humans, walking slowly along the ancient streets, fading and reappearing like echoes of time refusing to die. Alina pressed her hand against the glass. "They're not shadows," she murmured unconsciously. "They're living memories." The light from the city pulsed slowly, each beat like the breath of something awakening from a long slumber. The city was not dead. It was waiting. A soft resonance filled the air, like a choir of 1,000 voices rising from the same source. It was not human speech, yet its rhythm could be understood by the heart, not the ear. The ship began to drift toward the center of the city with no one at the controls. Meyer pressed the panels, but every system was frozen. "The ship's choosing its path," he whispered, his gaze locked on the glowing dome at the city's heart. Then, at the core of the sunken Lemuria, something emerged that made their breath falter. A crystalline tower, identical to the one they had seen at the surface, stood within the dome, shining with a deeper light, like the heartbeat of that forgotten world. The light pulsed in rhythm with time itself, and with each pulse, the entire city seemed to move slightly, as though still alive beneath the sea. Alina felt her chest tremble, as if something within her was connected to the tower's glow. She stared without blinking, and in that moment, she knew they had not discovered this city. The city had called them home. The ship drifted slowly between towers that stood still like guardians of time. The soft glow of crystals embedded in the city's walls guided their way, reflecting off remnants of buildings whose shapes defied logic. There were spiral pillars twisting toward the ocean ceiling, cracked domes with mosaics still shimmering as though time had hesitated to touch them. Every surface seemed to tell a story, through carvings, symbols, or patterns that moved subtly, as if breathing. Alina realized that these stones were not dead. They were alive, storing memories and voices that could not be heard by ordinary ears. Beneath the ship, streets paved with black stones stretched out, glowing faintly like embers that refused to die. As they passed through a massive gate leading toward the city center, the water's atmosphere changed. The pressure eased, the air felt light, as if they were drifting inside a dream. The ship's instruments displayed impossible readings, oxygen increasing, temperature stabilizing, and currents flowing in perfect harmony. It was as if the city created its own climate, shielding itself from the ruin above. Meyer stared at the control panel, shaking his head slowly. "These aren't ruins," he said. "They're still functioning." Rinaldi peered through the window and swallowed hard. "Maybe," he whispered, "we're entering its heart." Before them, the great dome that had appeared distant now opened slowly, like a colossal flower blooming underwater. From within came a silver-blue light, soft and pulsing, like the breath of an ancient being. The inner walls were covered with writing, no one could recognize circular symbols that intertwine like waves and stars, suggesting a knowledge bound with the universe itself. Alina gazed blankly at the markings. In her mind, she heard echoes, not words, but meanings she somehow understood. She whispered to herself, they didn't write to be read. They wrote to be remembered by time. When the ship came to rest at the base of the dome, the stone floor began to tremble gently. From the center, a ring of light appeared, swirling into a circular pattern. Meyer ordered silence. In that stillness, they heard something like the sound of distant waves, but it came from beneath the ground. Slowly, the ring of light turned into a surface like liquid glass, and within it appeared faint human faces. Not alive, not entirely gone, but remnants of consciousness that had refused to fade. Some faces looked peaceful, others filled with unspoken sorrow. Alina closed her eyes, tears falling before she even realized. She didn't know why, but her heart recognized them. Then something began to move along the walls. From the cracks emerged tiny orbs of light, floating gently in the water. They moved with purpose, gathering near the ship, attaching to its metallic hull, and tracing across the windows in intricate, self-writing symbols. The ship's system flickered, and a mechanical voice spoke in a language none could understand. Yet they all felt its meaning, welcome back. Alina trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper realization that everything she had sought in life did not lie ahead, but buried deep in the past. The city was speaking to her without words, and amid the slow pulse of light, she felt as though the entire ocean was listening. Meyer, his voice low, said, "Perhaps this city was never lost. Perhaps it just waited for us to remember." No one replied. Only silence remained, filled with light spinning slowly, like an ancient clock beating between two worlds, the living and the forgotten. Inside the dome, the ocean's air seemed to shift into something else, like a mist with its own awareness. The silvery blue light spread along the walls, following the lines of ancient inscriptions that pulsed softly. Every step they took echoed faintly, as if the stone floor still remembered the people who had walked there millions of years ago. In the distance came a faint sound like singing, but not from any human voice. Something far older. They moved through a circular corridor that seemed designed never to end, with walls reflecting their images in forms that were not always identical. Sometimes Elena's reflection appeared older, sometimes younger, as though time in this place did not flow in a single direction. At the center of a vast circular chamber, they found something resembling an altar, though it was not meant for worship. Its surface was smooth, surrounded by a ring of dark greenish metal that emitted a gentle heat, though no fire burned. Atop it rested a transparent sphere the size of a human head, filled with swirling mist. Rinaldi approached and, almost without thinking, touched it. Instantly the room quivered, and the dome's walls lit up in a rhythmic sequence, like the heartbeat of a city awakening from its ancient sleep. From within the sphere burst a flicker of light that transformed into images, dancing in the air like memories. They saw the same city, but a live sunlight filtering through clear waters, creatures gliding between towers. People walked along the streets, clothed in materials that shimmered, carrying crystals that glowed in their hands. Alina watched, unblinking. What she saw wasn't merely a recording, but the city's own memory. It was as if every stone held light within it, waiting for someone to awaken it. Meyer wrote in his small notebook, his hand trembling. "They understood energies we can't even imagine," he said softly. Lemuria wasn't just a civilization. It may have been part of something larger, perhaps planetary, perhaps conscious. His words drifted like echoes that refused to die. As the projection continued, the sky above the ancient city appeared strange, filled with massive stars that rotated slowly, closer than they are today. Time seemed to behave differently. Plants grew in spiral formations, and living beings moved as if to a rhythm only they could hear. In the midst of it stood a towering structure, crowned with a ring of perpetual light. From it radiated gentle waves that pulsed across the city, like the breath of a giant organism. Rinaldi stared at it tensely. "That must have been their control center," he said. "Or something that kept balance." Alina touched the glass before her, and the light within the sphere reacted. Suddenly, the vision changed. Lemuria was now collapsing, cracks spreading from its core outward. Water poured in from every direction, extinguishing the city's light, breaking towers, swallowing it whole. The Lemurians' faces appeared calm, as if they had long known it would happen. There was no panic, no running, only slow, graceful movement, like a final dance before eternal silence. The song returned, clearer this time, gentle and endless, like a prayer. Alina bowed her head, sensing that it wasn't a farewell, but a promise to rise again one day. When the projection ended, all lights dimmed. The blue mist in the sphere swirled quietly, as though waiting for the right moment to speak again. Meyer looked at Alina and Rinaldi and whispered, "We didn't find this city. It found us." No one replied. They stood in stillness, surrounded by fragments of light floating like stars beneath the sea. Outside, the ocean rested calm, as if breathing alongside the city that had awakened briefly, only to sink again into the memory of the deep. After the last light in the dome faded, silence fell upon the chamber like a thick curtain swallowing both sound and time. Alina stood still, staring at the transparent sphere that was now nothing more than a swirl of mist. And for a moment, she felt it was staring back at her. There was no movement, no sound, only the strange awareness that something within it was observing them, not through eyes, but through a consciousness untethered from any form. Rinaldi sat down slowly, his body drained, as though the energy of the city had absorbed part of his strength. Meyer continued to write in his notebook, but the ink began to drip slowly, spreading across the paper like veins. He stopped when he realized his hand was trembling. "This place is alive," he whispered. "Not in a biological sense, but like a neural network. The sea isn't merely water above these ruins, it's part of its memory." Alina studied the stone walls around them and noticed something she had missed before. The stones seemed to breathe faintly, expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly. She approached, pressed her palm against the surface, and felt a subtle vibration beneath it. The vibration was like a distant heartbeat, or the echo of waves traveling through the Earth's body. She withdrew her hand slowly, eyes fixed on the gently pulsing wall. "Maybe the city isn't dead," she said softly. "Maybe it sleeps." The words lingered in the air, and all three stood still, afraid that sound itself might awaken something beyond their understanding. Moments later, something changed outside the dome. The water, once still, began to swirl, forming a vast spiral current encircling the stone structure. In the distance, large fish appeared, swimming in synchronized patterns as if dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. Meyer peered through a crevice in the wall and widened his eyes. "They're waiting for a command," he murmured. Rinaldi stood, watching the currents shift above them, feeling a gentle pull from beneath his feet, like gravity itself calling for attention. "If this is a network," he said quietly, "then the sea is the signal." They chose to remain silent, to simply observe, letting the sea act according to its will. Amid that stillness, a faint light emerged from the floor. A stone circle slowly lit up, glowing with vein-like patterns that spread across the ground. The transparent sphere on the altar trembled once more, and this time the mist inside began to coalesce into the shape of a human face. It was neither male nor female, just a soft outline with closed eyes, as if in sleep. Alina stepped forward, unafraid, as though she somehow knew the presence was not hostile. She stopped at the altar, and after a long silence, the face inside opened its eyes. No words were spoken, only a calm radiance flowing outward. The face seemed serene, filled with ancient fatigue, and from its mouth came a whisper that broke into a sound, not heard but felt. "There is still light in the upper world." The voice spoke directly into their minds. "We did not die. We dwell in the breath of the sea. All things flow, and time is merely the bridge between tides." Alina closed her eyes, listening, feeling the message run through her veins. There was no fear, only the certainty that she was hearing something that had waited to be remembered. The light in the chamber pulsed softly, and the face vanished, leaving the sphere swirling again in silence. Yet its presence remained. The whole dome throbbed in a rhythm resembling a human heartbeat. Rinaldi looked at Meyer, then at Alina. "What just happened?" he said quietly. "Wasn't communication. It was remembrance." None of them spoke. They knew, in the weight of that silence, that Lemuria was not gone. It had only transformed into the sea itself, into awareness without form, waiting for the world to remember it once more. Outside, the spiral currents calmed, the fish dispersed, and the ocean returned to stillness. Yet they all knew something had stirred. In the deep, where light barely reached, Lemuria was breathing again. When they finally decided to leave the dome, their first steps felt heavier than they should. Not because of the pressure of the water, but because it seemed the sea itself was reluctant to let them go too soon. Every movement felt wrapped in something soft, yet powerful, like a gentle current embracing them from every side. Alina glanced down the stone corridor they had passed through earlier, and faint blue glimmers trailed behind, following slowly from afar. She didn't feel threatened rather. She sensed the city didn't want them to leave without carrying its message, as if a host had more to say before parting with its guests. Rinaldi led the way, his flashlight dimmer than before, as though artificial light was not fully allowed to shine in this place. The corridors seemed different now. The stones along the walls glowed softly, etched with lines resembling writing, though of no human language. The shapes were a mix of mathematical symbols and organic curves, like the trace of waves on sand. Meyer studied them carefully and said quietly, "This isn't writing. It's a map." He touched one of the lines, and the wall quivered faintly, then projected a faint image that began to move. It was not a simple map. It was a moving record, a projection showing an ocean with vast landmasses that no longer existed on Earth's surface. They watched as that continent Lemuria appeared in its full glory. Cities stood along the shores. Temples rose like towers of crystal, and rivers flowed in precise patterns, as if the land itself was designed like a living organism. Alina almost stopped breathing at the sight. "Look," she whispered, pointing to figures walking among the tall structures. Their bodies were tall and slender, their movements serene, as though they were underwater even on land. They didn't speak, only exchanged glances, and from their hands emitted faint sparks of light communication without sound. Meyer closed his eyes for a moment, trying to comprehend what he saw. "They didn't speak," he murmured. "They merged." Their minds must have been connected. Like electric currents through the water, Rinaldi stared deeper into the projection and saw something that made him swallow hard. At the center of the city, on a high plateau, stood a great tower facing the sea, emitting a beam of light toward the sky like a lighthouse that never faded. "That was their source of energy," he said softly, "and maybe their undoing." The projection flickered, weakening like a fading signal. The glowing lines on the walls went out one by one, and the room dimmed again. But just before everything disappeared, Alina heard something not sound, but a gentle resonance that slipped directly into her mind. A single sentence in a language she didn't know yet, somehow understood. "All things return to water, and from water, all things will be born again." She looked at her companions, and from their eyes, she knew they had heard it too. None of them spoke. None dared to interpret. They just stood still, letting the echo merge with the silence of the surrounding sea. As they moved toward the exit, the waters around them grew darker, yet warmer. Not the warmth of temperature, but of recognition, like the city knew they had understood something not meant for everyone. Outside, the currents lay still. No whirlpools, no light, only a softness like the peace of long sleep. They all knew, whatever happened in that place, it wasn't meant to be brought back as truth. Lemuria wasn't a secret waiting to be revealed. It was a memory, one that could only be heard by those quiet enough to listen to the sea's breath. As they began their ascent to the surface, the sea felt different. No longer cold and heavy, but filled with something slow and moving, like a current made of memories. Every air bubble rising seemed to shimmer before bursting, reflecting soft light across their faces. In the still darkness around them, they began to realize that the ocean was not an empty space, but a vessel for something older than time. Alina looked upward and saw a faint line of light far above, almost like a single star piercing the void. She knew they were leaving the domain of Lemuria, but part of her felt as if she was abandoning a home she had unknowingly longed for all her life. Rinaldi gripped the guide rope tightly, watching the bubbles drift upward in rhythm with their breathing. He turned to Meyer, who was still gazing downward toward the darkness they had just left behind. There was something different in Meyer's eyes, a mixture of awe and loss. "You feel it too, don't you?" Rinaldi asked softly. Meyer didn't answer, only nodded slowly. From the distance came a low hum, not a sound caught by the ear, but a vibration that traveled through their bones. It felt like the city they had left was giving them a final farewell. The higher they rose, the less pressure they felt, yet the more intense the strangeness became. The sea around them shifted in color from deep blue to green, then fading into gold. Tiny shimmering particles floated in the water like dust made of light. Alina remembered an ancient legend she once read about the breathing sea, a phenomenon when the ocean glowed because it remembered something that once happened within it. Perhaps this was the same. Perhaps the sea was remembering Lemuria, and they were only witnesses caught within its recollection. A few meters before reaching the surface, something appeared that made them pause. Amid the slow currents, a shape emerged, human-like, yet larger, softer, as if made of the water itself. The figure hovered silently, watching them without eyes or face, yet radiating awareness. There was no fear, only profound calm. Meyer slowly lifted his hand, as if to touch it, but before he could, the figure dissolved, melting into ripples that soon vanished in the current. None of them spoke. Only the sound of their breathing filled the silence, like the ticking of an invisible clock measuring timelessness. When their heads finally broke the surface, the world felt too bright. The sunlight pierced their eyes, blinding after so long enclosed in warm darkness. Small waves welcomed them, as if the sea was exhaling after releasing something precious. They floated in silence, listening only to their heartbeats. The sky above was perfectly blue, but within that blue, Alina felt something missing, a faint whisper that had been with them moments ago, now gone. Their rescue boat floated far away, swaying gently on the water. As they paddled toward it, the sea felt different, heavier, yet more alive. Every splash felt like touching the dreaming skin of the earth itself. None of them spoke during the return. They knew no words could explain what had happened below. Meyer looked out at the ocean and murmured, "This sea has never been silent. It only waits for those quiet enough to listen." When they finally climbed aboard, the world felt small and shallow compared to what they had left beneath. They looked at each other without speaking. In the distance, the sun leaned toward the west, and its reflection stretched across the water toward the place they had dived. The line of light trembled gently, like the ocean's signature, marking that something had happened on now remained only as a secret shared between humankind and the sea. Night arrived slowly, almost without sound. The sky above the sea shifted from pale blue to deep violet, then to a glistening black like wet glass. Stars appeared one by one, as if peering down, investigating the secret recently uncovered beneath the waves. Alina sat at the edge of the boat, her body still damp, gazing at the gentle ripples on the surface. She knew that beneath the water lay something that did not wish to be forgotten, yet also did not wish to be found again. Rinaldi lit a small lamp at the bow, its trembling glow moving with the breeze. There was no sound except the soft hiss of water brushing against the hull. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something that would never come. Meyer sat at the stern, holding his notebook soaked in salt water. Among its softened pages were scrawled lines now unreadable. The ink faded and dissolved. Yet he kept turning the pages, staring as though hoping the words might reappear on their own. Then he closed the notebook and looked up at the sky. If Lemuria ever existed, he said quietly, perhaps nights like this are how the sea remembers it. Calm on the surface, but beneath. Another world is pulsing, waiting for someone to listen again. Rinaldi said nothing. Only watched the sea, which looked like a vast pane of glass scattered with dancing starlight. Alina lay down on the floor of the boat, gazing at the stars twinkling between thin clouds. Amid the whisper of the waves, she heard a faint hum, almost imperceptible, like a song whispered from the deep. It was not a machine, not the wind, but something gentler, like a lullaby carried through water. She didn't know whether it was real or imagined, yet the sound made her eyes grow heavy, as if caressed by something unseen. She closed her eyes and let the world drift around her. In the distance, a faint ring of light appeared on the water's surface, swirling slowly like phosphorescent ripples. Rinaldi watched it without moving. The light came not from the boat or the stars, but from below, tracing across the surface as though following something moving in the depths. It formed a spiral, turning gently before fading, leaving behind small flickers of silver glimmering on the waves. None of them spoke, but all three knew the sea had not finished speaking. The night air grew colder, and a thin fog began to descend. They wrapped themselves in damp jackets, bracing against the chill. Yet there was a strange peace surrounding them, as if the sea had revealed only a fragment of its secret, then gently closed the rest, like someone shutting a memory before sleep. Alina took a deep breath, smelling the sharp salt mingled softly with the night air. Maybe, she whispered, Lemuria never really sank. Maybe it just moved to a place time can't reach. Rinaldi looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. Or maybe, he said, it never truly left. We just forgot how to see it. Meyer looked up at the stars, and for the first time that night, a small smile appeared on his face. The three of them sat in silence, letting the sea speak in a language beyond words. The waves came and went in slow rhythm, like the breathing of a dreaming world. In that stillness, nothing was certain except the feeling that they had become part of something far greater than themselves. Morning arrived slowly, like a sheet of light being pulled across the horizon. The night fog lifted bit by bit, leaving behind cold, damp, salty air. The small boat rocked gently, as if waking from a long sleep. Alina opened her eyes, droplets of water clinging to her hair and skin, and the world around her felt unfamiliar. There was no sound except the faint hiss of the waves and the distant cries of seabirds, faint as if carried from another time. Rinaldi sat leaning against the boat's edge, his face pale with fatigue. Yet his eyes still held a strange wonder that words could not capture. Meyer watched the sea as it shifted from black to silver, then to pale blue, as though the ocean was breathing again after holding so many secrets through the night. They sat in silence for a long while. No one tried to speak about what they had seen the night before, as if any word might disturb the fragile balance now hanging in the air. The sea looked calm, yet something had changed. Its surface seemed slightly heavier, as if echoing something that had just happened. Alina touched the water with her fingertips, and for a moment it felt as though she was touching the skin of a living creature asleep beneath the waves, cold, soft, and full of memory. She pulled her hand away slowly, watching the droplets fall back into the sea, merging again with a world older than anything they had ever known. Rinaldi finally broke the silence with a hoarse whisper. "Are you sure it wasn't just an illusion?" he asked. No answer came immediately. Meyer kept his gaze fixed on the horizon and said softly, "Some things don't need proof to be believed." The words hung in the air like a thin mist, unanswered, unchallenged. They simply sat there, letting the morning grow around them. In the distance, the faint outline of the coastline emerged. The small island they had left the night before appeared from the haze, with its silent forest and sand still damp with time. Birds crossed the sky, carrying sounds that felt unfamiliar after a night filled only with the murmur of the sea. The world seemed normal again, yet its silence was different. As though something had returned with them, something unseen that now lingered between their breaths and thoughts. Alina looked toward the shore and whispered, "If Lemuria truly existed, maybe part of it always travels with the water. And if water flows everywhere, then maybe a piece of Lemuria is in every ocean, every river, every rain." Rinaldi nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "Or maybe," he said, "it's within us. We're made of water. Maybe those memories live inside our blood." No one laughed at his words. No one denied them either. They began rowing toward the shore. Each stroke felt like more than just returning home. It was a movement away from something they were never meant to disturb. The small waves brushed against the boat's sides like hands that both held and released. As if the sea itself were whispering a soft goodbye, Alina looked back once more. The spot where they had seen the light last night looked the same as before. Flat, silent, colorless. Yet in her heart, she knew the sea was no longer the same. She carried something from it, though she did not yet know what form it would take. By the time their boat reached the sand, the sun had fully risen. The forest ahead glowed green and gold, and the wind carried the scent of earth, warmed after the dew. They jumped out, their feet sinking slightly into the wet sand. The land felt solid and warm, yet within their chests there was still a faint pulse from the sea of the night before. None of them spoke again. They simply walked slowly toward the forest, leaving the boat behind, rocking gently at the edge of the water like a memory not yet finished. The days after their return felt strange. Time moved as usual, yet something inside them was no longer in balance. Lena often woke up in the middle of the night without knowing what disturbed her. In her mind, the sea was still alive, swirling and whispering softly with a voice she could never quite understand. Sometimes, when she stared at a glass of water on the table, she felt as though she were gazing into the depths of her own soul. Meyer had grown quiet, spending more time writing in his notebook as if trying to capture something that kept slipping away before he could grasp it. Rinaldi, usually stubborn and rational, now spent hours sitting on the dock, staring at the sea with no clear purpose. They never spoke again of that night. Yet their silence became a shared language, the language of those who had seen something they were never meant to see. The fishing village they lived in began to notice the change. People said they looked like travelers who had returned from a faraway place but had not truly come home. Children ran around them, watching their faces with curiosity, while the elders merely shook their heads as if they understood something words could not convey. The sea around the island also seemed different. At times, its color looked deeper, heavier. Some fishermen claimed they heard faint sounds at night, like songs rising from beneath their boats, even when the waters were calm and the moon was high. Alina tried to return to her routine. She wrote reports, read ocean maps, checked the instruments they had brought from the expedition. But everything felt unreal now, like replicas of a world that no longer existed. She began to dream of the city beneath the waves, yet in her dreams it was no longer in ruins. She saw tall towers and glowing streets that pulsed like living veins. Shadows of people wore something like people walked among the columns of stone. They moved calmly, purposefully, paying her no attention. When she awoke, she always felt as if she had just left a home she could never find again. Meyer wrote a letter to a colleague in Europe. He wanted to report their findings, but when he reread his words, everything sounded like a fairy tale. He rewrote it, trying to make it scientific. Yet the more he wrote, the further it drifted from what he truly felt. Finally, he stopped writing altogether. He stared at the blank page, then closed the book quietly. At night, he sat on the veranda, watching the sea. Sometimes he saw faint lights in the distance, not as bright as that night, only a shimmer beneath the surface. He never dared to approach, only watched from afar, with a feeling somewhere between longing and fear. Rinaldi spent his days at the old pier. He brought a camera, taking photos of the waves, birds, and horizon. Yet unknowingly, most of his photos showed the same patch of empty sea. He realized it only when he developed them. Each picture, though taken on different days and times, always contained a faint shadow on the water, like something trying to emerge but never fully visible. He stared at the prints for a long time, then burned them one by one. The next day, he returned to the pier again, drawn by something he could not resist. Days passed. The sea remained still, but whenever the wind came, carrying that strange, salty scent. All three of them knew something still waited. They did not know what, but they shared the same sense that night had not been the end, but the beginning of something much larger, something that might not only exist in the ocean, but within themselves. A few weeks later, the signs began to appear. No longer mere shadows in the sea or faint whispers at night, but something that seeped into the real world in subtle, undeniable ways. Small stones along the shore began to glow faintly at dusk, as if holding on to the last light of the setting sun. Fishermen returning with their catch claimed they saw fish with shimmering silver-blue scales, unlike any species they had ever known. Even a child brought home a seashell that produced a soft tone when the wind passed through it, not the sound of waves, but a flute-like melody that pierced straight into the listener's heart. Alina, who had once clung to reason, began to surrender to the fact that something was moving beyond the limits of her understanding. Every time she opened the ocean maps, the contour lines seemed to shift slightly, as though unseen hands were redrawing them. One night, she woke to find her notebook open on the table, displaying a new page filled with sketches of that underwater city, though she had never drawn them. The lines were sharp, intricate, alive, as if drawn by someone who had once lived there. In the corner of the page was a phrase written in a language she didn't know. But the longer she stared at it, the more she felt the meaning begin to form in her mind. Meyer grew obsessed with the patterns of light on the sea. He set up cameras and recorders on the pier, but the results were strange. Each night, the shapes changed. Sometimes spirals, sometimes symbols, sometimes only irregular lines pulsing like the heartbeat of a giant creature. He began to suspect that the sea was speaking to him not with words, but with form and light. Yet, to whom the message was meant, whether to them or to something else, no one could say. Rinaldi, who had always rejected anything mystical, was the one most deeply shaken. He began to hear a voice in his head, soft and repeating, as if someone were calling him by a name he didn't know yet somehow felt deeply familiar. The voice was not threatening, but filled with longing. He started wandering toward the water without realizing it, even in the middle of the night. Once Alina found him standing knee-deep in the surf, staring into the depths without blinking. When she pulled him back to shore, he whispered hoarsely, "They're not done with us." From that night on, all three of them understood that the boundary between their world and the one hidden beneath the waves was thinning. Whatever remained in that sea was slowly finding its way back. The sea that night was utterly calm, as if the entire world had paused its breath, waiting for something beyond explanation. The waves moved gently, and in the distance, the horizon seemed to blur into a soft glow that came neither from moon nor stars. Alina stood by the shore, the salty wind brushing her face, carrying the faint metallic scent of something older than time itself. She looked out over the water with tired yet knowing eyes, and in that silence she understood that everything had come full circle. It wasn't a harsh ending, but a quiet return, inevitable and serene. Lemuria had never truly vanished. It had only hidden beneath the aging layers of the Earth's memory. Behind her, Meyer lit the final lantern and set it upon a moss-covered rock. The small flame trembled in the wind, then drifted slowly away on the tide, floating toward the faint glow far out at sea. The three of them stood motionless, listening to the distant murmur rising from the depths. A song without words that might have come from the sunken city or perhaps from the collective memory of humankind, too stubborn to let go. Within that whisper was a strange warmth, as if the ocean itself sought to soothe them, assuring that everything in existence has its rightful place, even what is lost. The sky gradually shifted color from deep blue to gold, then fading into pale gray. There was nothing left to explain. The notebooks, the maps, The recordings all became meaningless objects when faced with something that defied all measure and logic. Alina closed her eyes and listened to her heartbeat merge with the rhythm of the tide. She thought that perhaps Lemuria was not a place on any map, but an echo living within every soul that has ever looked upon the sea with longing. A kind of ancient remembrance that cannot be erased, only lulled to sleep until someone remembers again. When dawn came, the first light touched their faces, and the world returned to its ordinary stillness. The blue light was gone, the song from the deep was gone, and only the vast, quiet sea remained. They turned away slowly, leaving the shore without looking back, letting the mystery stay where it belonged, resting beneath the waves, like a story waiting to be dreamed once more. In the distance, their final lantern went out, yet somewhere deep below, another light might just have awakened.